Paid for my brother's wedding, but said they were too broke for mine. Ethan Walker, 30, a dedicated public school teacher with a quiet strength, has never been the golden child. That role belonged to his older brother Ryan, charismatic, successful, and forever the family's pride. So when Ethan got engaged to Laura, a pediatric nurse with warmth and grace, he knew not to expect fireworks. But what he didn't expect was silence. His parents, Diane and Mark, had thrown Ryan a grand wedding 2 years earlier, full of flowers, music, and open bars. When Ethan asked for the same support, he heard 4 words that shattered him. "We're just too broke." No explanation, no apology, just the quiet implication that his love story mattered less. Ethan and Laura move forward with what they can afford: a simple ceremony, a small guest list, a rented backyard. But when the wedding day comes, unexpected truths rise to the surface, not with confrontation, but with grace. Because Ethan isn't interested in revenge, he's interested in love. And what begins as a story of rejection slowly transforms into a deeper understanding of himself, his family, and the power of standing tall even when you feel small. In his story of favoritism, quiet strength, and emotional courage, Ethan learns that value isn't measured in dollars, but in who shows up when it counts. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, this story is for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Ethan's journey isn't over yet, and what happens next might just change everything. Chapter 1: The Golden Child and the Afterthought. Have you ever felt like no matter what you do, you'll never measure up to someone else's expectations? If that strikes a chord, stick around until the end of this series because Ethan's journey might just help you find your own strength. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this story that's resonated with thousands of viewers just like you. The Boston autumn painted the trees in fiery hues of amber and crimson as Ethan Walker graded papers at his modest kitchen table. At 30, he had the kind of face that wore kindness in its creases, warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a patient smile that his 5th-grade students trusted instinctively. Outside his apartment window, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dorchester, the working-class neighborhood he'd called home for the past 6 years. His phone buzzed against the wooden tabletop. Laura's smiling face lit up the screen, sending a wave of warmth through his chest. "Hey you," he answered, his voice softening the way it always did for her. "I just got off shift," Laura said, the fatigue of a 12-hour pediatric nursing rotation evident in her voice, though it couldn't dim her natural brightness. "Any news?" Ethan's eyes drifted to the small velvet box sitting beside his stack of ungraded math tests. "Not yet. I'm having dinner with them tomorrow night."
There was a pause on the line. "Are you nervous?" "About asking my parents for help with our wedding?" Ethan let out a dry laugh. "What could possibly go wrong?" He heard Laura's gentle sigh. "They love you, Ethan." "They love Ryan more," he replied, the words slipping out before he could catch them. "Sorry, that wasn't fair." "It's okay to feel what you feel," Laura said, her voice carrying the same gentle reassurance she offered the children on her hospital ward. "Just remember, this is about us, not about your brother." But it had always been about Ryan, hadn't it? Ryan Walker, 3 years older, 6 inches taller, and infinitely more successful by their parents' standards. Ryan with his MBA from Wharton, his corner office at a financial consulting firm, and his picture-perfect wedding to Melissa, the daughter of one of their father's golf buddies. Ethan closed his eyes, remembering his parents' faces at Ryan's wedding 2 years ago, how his mother had glowed with pride during the reception at the Boston Harbor Hotel, how his father had clapped Ryan on the back and declared to anyone who would listen, "That's my boy." The memory of the lavish affair, crystal chandeliers, 5-tier cake, open bar with top-shelf liquor, sat uneasily against the reality of Ethan's bank account. As a public school teacher, he made enough to live comfortably, but not enough to give Laura the wedding she deserved without going into serious debt. I'll call you after. Love you. Love you more, Laura replied, their familiar exchange. The next evening found Ethan parallel parking his 10-year-old Honda Civic in front of his parents' colonial-style home in Newton, an affluent suburb that had always felt more like a museum than a place where he'd grown up. The house loomed before him, pristine white with black shutters and a perfectly manicured lawn, the physical manifestation of Mark and Diane Walker's expectations. His mother answered the door in pressed slacks and a cashmere sweater, her silver-streaked hair perfectly styled. "Ethan, honey," she said, kissing his cheek. Her perfume, expensive and subtle, enveloped him in memories of childhood piano recitals and parent-teacher conferences where nothing he did was quite enough. "Come in, your father's in the living room." Mark Walker sat in his leather armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed what looked like investment statements. At 62, he maintained the rigid posture of the former military man he was, his salt and pepper hair cut in the same short style he'd worn for decades. "Son," he acknowledged, setting the papers aside. "How are things at the school?" "Good. We just started a new STEM program I'm pretty excited about." His father nodded, though his eyes held the familiar glaze they always did when Ethan spoke about teaching. "That's nice. Ryan just landed the Westfield account. 7 figures. "That's great," I said, the words automatic after years of practice. "Good for him."
Dinner was a carefully choreographed affair of roast chicken, steamed vegetables, and polite conversation that skimmed the surface of their lives. His mother asked about Laura. She liked Laura, appreciated her steady career choice, while his father steered the conversation toward Ryan's recent promotion and vacation to the Maldives. It wasn't until dessert, apple pie, that his mother had definitely not baked herself, but presented as if she had, that Ethan finally found an opening. "So, Laura and I have set a date," he said, cutting into the perfectly browned crust. "June 15th. His mother brightened. "Oh, that's wonderful! Where are you thinking of having it?" "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." Ethan set down his fork, steeling himself. "We've been looking at venues, but everything in Boston is so expensive. I remembered how you and Dad helped Ryan and Melissa with their wedding, and I was hoping—" "Oh, Ethan," his mother interrupted, her smile faltering. She glanced at his father, a silent conversation passing between them. "Things are a bit different now." His father cleared his throat, suddenly very interested in his pie. "Financially speaking, we're not in the same position we were 2 years ago." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his stomach tightening. "We're just too broke," his father said, the words landing like stones in still water. "The market hasn't been kind to my retirement portfolio, and we've had to tighten our belts." Ethan looked around the immaculate dining room, at his mother's new diamond earrings that caught the light, at the brochure for a Mediterranean cruise peeking out from beneath the stack of mail on the sideboard. "I see," he said quietly, the familiar ache of being the afterthought, the less important son spreading through his chest. "We can contribute something small," his mother offered, her voice thin with discomfort. "Maybe for the rehearsal dinner?" "It's fine," Ethan replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll figure it out." Later that night, as he drove back to his apartment through the winding suburban streets of Newton toward the grittier landscape of Boston proper, Ethan felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on him. It wasn't about money. It had never been about money. It was about value, about worth. His phone rang through the car speakers, Laura's name illuminating the dashboard. "Hey," he answered, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "How did it go?" she asked, hope lifting her words. Ethan watched as the towering buildings of downtown Boston came into view, their lights piercing the darkness like stars brought down to earth. In that moment, he made a decision. This wouldn't be a story of bitterness or revenge. It would be a story of choosing what kind of man he wanted to be. "They can't help," he said simply, "but that's okay. We'll have the wedding we can afford, and it will be perfect because it will be ours."
The silence on the other end spoke volumes before Laura finally responded, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Ethan Walker." "I love you too," he replied, and for the first time that evening, his smile was genuine, more than anything. As he navigated the familiar streets toward home, Ethan couldn't know that this was just the beginning, that the simple wedding he and Laura were about to plan would become the catalyst for unexpected revelations, painful truths, and ultimately a kind of healing he couldn't yet imagine. If this story about family dynamics and finding your worth speaks to you, don't leave without hitting that subscribe button. The journey Ethan's about to take gets even more emotional, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Your subscription means we can keep bringing these real, raw stories to life. Next time, Ethan and Laura begin planning their modest wedding, only to discover that family complications run deeper than they ever realized. Chapter 2: Planning on a Shoestring. Steam rose from Laura's coffee mug, fogging her wire-rimmed glasses as she hunched over their kitchen table, surrounded by wedding brochures and printouts from budget wedding websites. Outside, February snow blanketed Boston in hushed white, the morning sunlight turning the icicles hanging from their apartment windowsill into prisms. "What about this place?" Laura asked, pushing a printout toward Ethan. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes betraying the overnight shift she'd just finished at Boston Children's Hospital. Despite her exhaustion, her hazel eyes sparked with determination. Ethan studied the page. A converted barn in western Massachusetts, rustic and simple. The price was still steep, but less outrageous than anything they'd found in the city. "It's beautiful," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "But it's still $4,000 just for the venue." Laura's shoulders slumped slightly. At 29, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen both life's fragility and its resilience in equal measure through her work as a pediatric nurse. But wedding planning on their combined salaries was wearing her down. "We could always elope," she suggested, not for the first time. Ethan shook his head. "You deserve a real wedding, Laura, with your friends there and your dad walking you down the aisle. Oh, I want to see your face when you walk toward me." Laura's expression softened. She stood and moved around the table, settling onto his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. "All I need is you," she whispered against his ear. "The rest is just details." But Ethan knew better. He'd seen how Laura's eyes lit up when they passed bridal shops, how she'd stopped to admire flower arrangements in store windows. She'd never had the heart to go dress shopping, knowing their limited budget. "What about your cousin's backyard, the one in Lexington with the big oak tree?"
Laura straightened, considering. "Maggie's place? You think she'd let us use it?" "It's worth asking," Ethan said, his mind already calculating. "We could rent chairs, string up some lights in the trees, get a simple catering package for the food." Laura's face brightened with possibility. "My aunt makes wedding cakes as a side business. I bet she'd give us a discount." For the first time in weeks, the weight on Ethan's shoulders felt a little lighter. They spent the morning reimagining their wedding, not as the scaled-down version of Ryan and Melissa's extravaganza, but as something uniquely theirs, simple, intimate, meaningful. Later that afternoon, Ethan's phone buzzed with his mother's ringtone. He hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Ethan, darling." Diane's voice carried its usual blend of warmth and distance. "I was just calling to see how the wedding plans are coming along." Ethan moved to the window, watching snow fall in the quiet street below. "We're figuring it out. Probably going to have it in Laura's cousin's backyard. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Oh," his mother finally said, disappointment evident in that single syllable. "I was thinking, maybe I could take Laura dress shopping. Nothing extravagant, of course, but every bride should have that experience." Ethan closed his eyes, conflicting emotions washing over him. Part of him wanted to refuse on principle. Where was this offer when they'd ask for actual help? Another part recognized his mother was trying in her limited way. "I think she'd like that. Thank you." "And Ethan?" His mother paused. "Your father and I were discussing it, and we'd like to contribute $2,000. It's not much, but—" "It's fine, Mom," Ethan interrupted, unsure whether to feel grateful or insulted by the amount. Less than the cost of the ice sculpture at Ryan's wedding. "We appreciate it." After hanging up, Ethan sat on the edge of their bed, phone still in hand. He scrolled to a different contact, and after a moment's hesitation, pressed call. "Hey, little brother," Ryan's confident voice answered after 2 rings. In the background, Ethan could hear the sounds of a busy restaurant. His brother was probably at one of his business lunches. "Hey, Rye, do you have a minute?" "For you? Always," though the distraction in his voice suggested otherwise. "What's up?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Laura and I are planning our wedding, and I was wondering if you might have any vendor recommendations. Someone who might cut us a deal, maybe?" "Dude, absolutely. Melissa still has all our planning stuff. I'll have her email you. How much are Mom and Dad putting in? Maybe we can help you stretch it." His throat tightened. "They're giving us $2,000.
A pause. 2,000? That's it? They said they're broke, Ethan explained, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. Broke? Ryan let out a disbelieving laugh. Dad just bought a new Mercedes last month, and they're taking that Mediterranean cruise in April. Ethan closed his eyes, the confirmation of what he'd suspected landing like a physical blow. I figured as much. That's bullshit, Eth, Ryan said, anger evident in his voice. They dropped nearly 40 grand on our wedding. The number hit Ethan like a slap. 40,000? At least, probably more with all the extras Mom kept adding. Ryan's voice lowered, as if he was moving somewhere more private. Listen, Melissa and I could help. We could give you— No, Ethan cut him off, pride straightening his spine. Thanks, but no. This isn't about the money, Ryan. Then what is it about? The question hung in the air, heavier than it should have been for a casual afternoon call. Ethan stared at the framed photo on his nightstand, himself and Ryan as children, arms slung around each other's shoulders, gap-toothed grins, identical despite the 3 years between them. I know when something's bothering you. Ethan's resolve crumbled under her steady gaze. My mom called. They're giving us $2,000. Laura's face brightened. That's great! They're giving us $2,000. Ryan says they spent $40,000 on his wedding. Laura's smile faded. She led him to the couch, settling beside him. Oh, Ethan. It's fine, he said automatically. It is what it is. It's not fine, Laura replied gently, but firmly. It's hurtful, and it's unfair. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You know what the worst part is? If they'd just been honest, if they'd said, we don't have that kind of money for you, I would have understood. But the lying, the pretending. Laura rested her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his. What do you want to do? The question was simple, but it cut through the noise in Ethan's mind. What did he want? To confront his parents? To call them out on their favoritism? To demand equal treatment? None of those options felt right. I want to marry you, he said finally, turning to look into her eyes. In a ceremony that feels like us, with people who truly want to be there. And then I want to build a life where we never make anyone feel the way they've made me feel. Laura's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she leaned forward to kiss him softly. Then that's exactly what we'll do. As they sat together in the gentle quiet of their apartment, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted within him, a release of expectations he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The wedding wouldn't be what his parents deemed worthy, but it would be honest.
It would be theirs. What he didn't know was that his mother's offer to take Laura dress shopping would set in motion a series of events that would bring long-buried family tensions to the surface and force everyone to confront truths they'd spent years avoiding. Chapter 3. Unexpected Revelations. April arrived in Boston with stubborn patches of snow clinging to shaded corners and the first brave crocuses pushing through the thawing earth. Inside Elegance Bridal Boutique in Beacon Hill, Laura stood on a small platform surrounded by mirrors, while Diane Walker circled her with the critical eye of a gallery curator assessing a new acquisition. "I think the A-line flatters your figure more," Diane said, adjusting the shoulder of the fourth dress Laura had tried on, a simple satin gown with delicate lace accents. The boutique attendant hovered nearby, champagne flute in hand, though neither woman had touched their drinks. Laura caught the reflection of her future mother-in-law's face, the slight purse of lips, the calculating gaze. She'd agreed to the shopping trip for Ethan's sake, but 3 hours in, she was regretting her decision. "Actually," Laura said, smoothing her hands over the fabric, "I really love this one." Diane's perfectly penciled eyebrows arched slightly. "It's quite plain, dear." "I like plain. It feels like me." A beat of silence passed between them before Diane's shoulders relaxed marginally. "Well, you're the bride." She turned to the attendant. "Could we see it with a more substantial veil? Something cathedral length, perhaps?" While the attendant disappeared into the back room, Diane settled onto a velvet settee, absently turning her diamond tennis bracelet around her wrist, a nervous habit Laura had noticed over their few previous encounters. "You know," Diane said after a moment, "when Ryan and Melissa got married, we had 5 different venues to choose from. The Harbor Hotel was actually our third choice, but the other places were booked."
Laura felt a familiar sting on Ethan's behalf, but kept her expression neutral. It looked beautiful in the photos. "It was," Diane said, a wistful smile crossing her face. "Everything was perfect. The flowers, the band. Mark spared no expense." She paused, something flashing across her features before she composed herself. "Not that money makes a wedding, of course." "Of course," Laura echoed, studying the older woman. At 60, Diane Walker maintained the polished appearance of a woman who had spent her life cultivating a specific image: designer clothes, tasteful jewelry, and the kind of meticulous grooming that required significant time and resources. Yet beneath the perfection, Laura sensed something fragile. The attendant returned with a flowing veil, providing a welcome interruption. As she arranged it over Laura's hair, Diane's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it, her face tightening. "Everything okay?" Laura asked. "Fine," Diane replied too quickly. "Just Mark, checking in about lunch plans." But as the appointment continued, Diane grew increasingly distracted, checking her phone repeatedly. By the time Laura had made her decision, the simple dress with a shorter veil than Diane had suggested, her future mother-in-law was visibly agitated. "Are you sure you're all right?" Laura asked as they left the boutique, stepping into the crisp spring air of Charles Street. Diane stopped abruptly, her carefully composed mask slipping. "It's Mark," Diane admitted, her voice uncharacteristically small. "We had another argument about money this morning." "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, I'm sorry," Diane said, surprising Laura with her directness. "I know $2,000 isn't much, especially compared to what we did for Ryan." Laura shifted uncomfortably. "Ethan understands." "Does he?" Diane's laugh held no humor. "I'm not sure I do anymore." They walked in silence toward the public garden, where cherry blossoms had begun to open. Diane led them to an empty bench beside the lagoon, where the swan boats would soon begin their seasonal journeys. "Can I tell you something, Laura?" Diane asked, her gaze fixed on the still water. "Something I've never told anyone?" Laura nodded,
a strange tension settling between her shoulder blades. Mark and I almost divorced when Ethan was in high school. Mark had strayed with his secretary, so cliché it's almost embarrassing. She smoothed invisible wrinkles from her skirt. I found out, confronted him, packed my bags. Laura's eyes widened. Ethan never mentioned anything about this. Because he doesn't, Diane replied. Not even Ryan. But you stayed, Laura said softly. Diane nodded, twisting her wedding band. Mark begged, promised to end it, said he'd do anything. Her gaze drifted across the park, where a young couple pushed a stroller along the pathway. So I made my price. Your price? Financial security, Diane said simply. I made him sign over control of our accounts to me. I manage every penny now. I decide where the money goes.
Laura struggled to process this revelation. So when you told Ethan you couldn't help with the wedding, that was me, Diane confirmed, meeting Laura's eyes directly for perhaps the first time. Not Mark, me. But why? Laura asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Why would you deny Ethan the same support you gave Ryan? Diane's facade cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Because Ryan is like his father, charming, ambitious, and ultimately selfish. I knew that whoever he married would need every advantage, every safety net. She paused, blinking rapidly. But Ethan is different. He's steady, reliable. True. Like you, Laura said quietly. Diane's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. The first time Ethan brought you home, I knew. I saw how he looked at you, how you balanced each other. You don't need a fancy wedding to make your marriage work. You're already built on something real. Laura sat back, momentarily speechless. In a strange, twisted way, Diane's favoritism toward Ryan had been her attempt to compensate for what she perceived as his character deficiencies. Mrs. Walker, Diane, please. Diane, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that's your decision to make, and I don't think it's fair to Ethan. Diane dabbed at the corner of her eye with a monogrammed handkerchief. Perhaps not, but there's something else you should know. She took a deep breath. Ryan and Melissa are divorcing. What? Laura gasped. But they've only been married 2 years. She found out he was having an affair with one of his colleagues. Like father, like son, I suppose. She thought of Ryan, tall and handsome like his father, with the same easy charm and confident swagger. She thought of Ethan, quieter, more thoughtful, his integrity as much a part of him as his kind eyes and patient smile. Does Ethan know about Ryan's divorce? She asked. Diane shook her head. Ryan's asked us not to tell anyone until the papers are filed. He's embarrassed, I think. $40,000 for a marriage that lasted 26 months. They sat in silence, watching as the breeze rippled across the water. Laura's mind raced, piecing together the complex family dynamics that had shaped the man she loved. I think, Laura said finally, choosing her words with care, that you've been trying to protect everyone in your own way. But Ethan deserves honesty, not protection. Diane studied Laura with newfound respect. You're good for him. We're good for each other, Laura corrected gently, and I think you should tell him the truth about the money, about why you've treated him and Ryan differently. He deserves that. Diane nodded slowly, resignation and relief mingling in her expression. You're right. She reached over, surprising Laura by taking her hand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, and I'm glad you found that dress. It's perfect for you, elegant in its simplicity. As they walked back toward the boutique where Diane had parked her car, Laura felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the dysfunctional Walker family dynamics, compassion for Diane's misguided attempts to balance the scales, and a renewed appreciation for Ethan's strength of character, despite his upbringing. What neither woman could know was that at that very moment, Ryan was sitting in Ethan's classroom after school hours, making a confession of his own,
one that would further complicate the already tangled web of family secrets and set the stage for a wedding day that would unfold in ways none of them could anticipate. Chapter 4: Brothers and Broken Pieces. The last fifth grader had left Ethan's classroom 30 minutes ago, but he remained at his desk, surrounded by science projects in various states of completion. Rain pattered against the windows of Roosevelt Elementary, turning the Boston afternoon gray and muted. He was arranging the solar system models for tomorrow's presentations when a knock at the classroom door broke his concentration. Ryan stood in the doorway, his 6'2" frame almost comically out of place among the kid-sized desks and colorful educational posters. Despite the casual jeans and untucked button-down, he emanated the easy confidence that had always seemed to Ethan as much a part of his brother as his dark hair and Walker family jawline. "Hey," Ryan said, holding up a cardboard drink carrier. "Brought reinforcements." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. Ryan hadn't visited his classroom in the 4 years he'd been teaching at Roosevelt. "What's the occasion?" Ryan set 2 coffee cups on Ethan's desk and pulled up a child-sized chair, his knees practically at his chest. Can a guy bring his little brother coffee without an interrogation? "A normal guy, sure. You? I'm not so sure about." Ryan's laugh didn't quite reach his eyes. He glanced around the classroom, taking in the student artwork pinned to bulletin boards and the neatly labeled science equipment. "This is a cool space, Eth. You really made it your own." "Thanks," Ethan said, studying his brother over the rim of his coffee cup. The dark circles under Ryan's eyes and the slight disarray of his usually perfect hair told him something was wrong. "Seriously, though, what brings you to my humble corner of academia?" Ryan's gaze dropped to his coffee. He turned the cup in his hands, a gesture so uncharacteristically nervous that Ethan felt a twinge of concern. "Melissa left me," Ryan said finally, his voice flat. Ethan set down his cup. "What? When?" 3 weeks ago." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing at odd angles. "It's been not great." "Why didn't you call me?" Ethan asked, genuinely hurt. Despite their differences, despite the complicated dynamics of their relationship, they were brothers. Ryan's laugh was hollow. "Pride? Shame? Take your pick." He took a long drink of his coffee. "Also, I didn't want to mess up your wedding plans with my drama."
"That's ridiculous," Ethan said. "What happened?" Ryan's shoulders slumped, the carefully constructed facade of success cracking before Ethan's eyes. "I cheated on her. With someone from work." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Ethan thought of their father, the business trips that ran suspiciously long, the late-night phone calls he'd taken his study, the tension that sometimes crackled between their parents for reasons young Ethan could never understand. "Shit, Ryan," Ethan said finally. "Yeah, I really screwed up, Eth. And the worst part is, I don't even know why I did it. Melissa is amazing. Our life was perfect." "Was it?" Ethan asked quietly. Ryan looked up surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, was it actually perfect, or did it just look perfect from the outside?" The question seemed to catch Ryan off guard. He stared at his brother for a long moment before his shoulders sagged. "I don't know anymore. Everything's always come easy to me. School, work, dating, even marriage seemed like just another achievement to unlock." He shook his head. "But I've been watching you and Laura." "What about us?" "You guys are the real deal. The way you look at each other, the way you talk about her. I've never had that. Not with Melissa, not with anyone." Ethan absorbed this, unsure how to respond. His entire life he'd envied Ryan. His confidence, his success, the easy way their parents had always favored him. Never once had it occurred to him that Ryan might envy him in return. "Is that why you're here? To tell me about Melissa?" "Partly, but also because I've been thinking about Mom and Dad and how they've treated you, how I've treated you." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "We don't need to go there, Rye." "No, I think we do." Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I know they're only giving you $2,000 for your wedding. It's bullshit, Eth. Complete bullshit." "It's fine." Ethan said automatically, the familiar refrain. It's not fine, Ryan insisted, a flash of anger crossing his features. They spent 40 grand on my wedding, a wedding that lasted 2 years before imploding spectacularly, I might add. They said they're broke, Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. Ryan's bitter laugh echoed in the empty classroom. They're not broke. Dad just bought a new Mercedes. They're going on a Mediterranean cruise next month. Mom got those diamond earrings for Christmas. He shook his head in disgust. They're not broke. They just don't want to spend the money on you. The blunt assessment stung, even though Ethan had suspected as much. Hearing it confirmed by Ryan, the golden child himself, somehow made it more real, more painful. Maybe they've always seen something in you that I don't, Ethan said, aiming for lightness but missing by a mile.
Ryan's expression darkened. Don't do that. Don't make excuses for them. He ran a hand through his hair again, a gesture so reminiscent of their father that Ethan almost winced. Look, I've been their favorite my whole life. I've known it, you've known it, everyone's known it. And for a long time, I liked it. I let myself believe I deserved it. And now? Ethan asked. Now I'm 33, divorced, sleeping on my friend's couch, and realizing I've built my entire life on other people's expectations. Ryan's voice cracked slightly. Meanwhile, you've been quietly building something real, something that matters. Ethan didn't know what to say. The scripted responses he'd developed over years of playing second fiddle suddenly seemed inadequate. Ryan reached into his messenger bag and pulled out an envelope. Here, he said, sliding it across Ethan's desk. What's this? $25,000, Ryan said simply. Ethan recoiled as if the envelope might burn him. No, absolutely not. It's not charity, Eth, Ryan said quickly. It's reparations. It's me trying to balance the scales a little. I don't want your money, Ethan insisted, pushing the envelope back toward his brother. It's not my money, Ryan countered. It's Mom and Dad's. Or it was. Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? Ryan sighed, looking suddenly uncomfortable. Remember that trust fund Grandpa Walker set up for us? Vaguely. Their grandfather had died when they were teenagers, leaving behind a modest estate that their father had managed. When we turned 25, we were each supposed to get access to our portion, about $50,000 each. You never asked about yours, did you? A cold feeling settled in Ethan's stomach. No. He said Grandpa's investments didn't pan out, that there was barely enough to cover his medical bills at the end. Ryan's expression confirmed what Ethan was beginning to suspect. That was a lie. My trust came through right on schedule when I turned 25. I assumed yours did too, 3 years later. Ethan stared at his brother, a lifetime of small inequities suddenly crystallizing into something much larger, much more deliberate. They kept my trust fund? Ryan nodded grimly. I only found out last year when I was helping Dad organize some tax documents. I saw the disbursement records. He tapped the envelope. This is half of what should have been yours. I would give you the full amount, but I'd spent the rest. On your wedding, Ethan guessed. Ryan had the grace to look ashamed. In other things, I'm sorry, Eth. I should have said something sooner. Ethan sat back in his chair trying to process this revelation. His parents hadn't just favored Ryan, they had actively diverted resources meant for him. The knowledge settled like a stone in his chest, heavy and immovable. Does Laura know? Ryan asked after a moment. About the trust fund? No, Ethan replied. I never knew about it myself. No, I mean about Mom and Dad only giving you $2,000 for the wedding.
Ethan nodded. She knows. She doesn't care. She just wants us to get married. Backyard, courthouse, wherever. Ryan smiled sadly. She's a good one, Eth. Don't let her go. I don't plan to. Rain continued to drum against the windows as the brothers sat in silence, the weight of family secrets and unspoken resentments filling the space between them. After a while, Ryan stood,
his knees cracking as he unfolded from the small chair. "Take the money," he said quietly. "Not for me, not even to spite Mom and Dad. Do it for Laura. Give her the wedding she deserves." Ethan looked at the envelope, conflicting emotions warring within him. Pride told him to refuse. Anger told him to take it and confront his parents. Love for Laura whispered that perhaps there was a middle path, one that acknowledged the hurt without letting it dictate his future. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Ryan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this non-committal answer. He moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "For what it's worth, Eth, I've always looked up to you. Even when I was getting all the attention, all the praise, I knew you were the better man." Before Ethan could respond, Ryan was gone, leaving behind only the sound of his footsteps echoing down the empty school hallway. Ethan sat alone in his classroom, surrounded by the innocent creativity of his students' projects, the envelope heavy on his desk. Outside, the rain began to ease, a watery sunlight breaking through the clouds and casting long shadows across the room. His phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "Finished early, coming to pick you up. Wedding talk over dinner?" Looking at her message, Ethan made his decision. He would take Ryan's money, not out of spite or bitterness, but as a reclamation of what had been wrongfully kept from him. He would use it to give Laura the wedding she truly wanted, not an extravagant affair like Ryan's, but something that reflected who they were as a couple.
And when the day came, he would stand tall beside the woman he loved, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for them both. Whatever healing might come with his family, whatever conversations needed to happen with his parents, could wait until after he and Laura had begun their life together, on their terms. What Ethan couldn't know was that as he sat contemplating his future, Laura was driving toward the school with revelations of her own. Secrets shared by Diane during their afternoon shopping trip that would further complicate the Walker family dynamics and set the stage for a wedding day unlike anything any of them had anticipated. Chapter 5: The Wedding Day. If this story has resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these authentic human journeys that remind us all what truly matters in life. Leave a comment below about a time when you had to stand tall in your own truth. I read every single one. And now, the conclusion of Ethan and Laura's story. June 15th arrived with the kind of perfect weather that wedding planners pray for: clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures that hovered in the mid-70s. In Maggie's Lexington backyard, white wooden chairs formed neat rows on the lush green lawn, facing an arbor draped with soft white fabric and sprays of wildflowers. Paper lanterns hung from the branches of the ancient oak tree, waiting for evening to transform them into celestial orbs of warm light. In the upstairs guest bedroom that had been converted into a bridal suite, Laura stood before a full-length mirror, her hands smoothing the simple satin of her dress. The natural light streaming through the bay windows caught the delicate lace detail at her shoulders and the pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. "You look beautiful," said Sarah, Laura's best friend since nursing school, adjusting the small white flowers woven into Laura's loose updo. Laura's eyes met Sarah's in the mirror. "I can't believe we pulled this off." The past 2 months had been a whirlwind. After Ethan had told her about Ryan's revelation and the trust fund money, they decided to use it to create not an extravagant wedding, but the wedding they truly wanted. They'd hired a local caterer known for farm-to-table cuisine, found a string quartet of Berklee College of Music students, and splurged on a photographer whose work captured the quiet, intimate moments that often went unnoticed. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of Laura's father, Michael Bennett, his eyes immediately welling with tears at the sight of his daughter. "Oh, Laura," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you're a vision." Laura crossed the room to embrace him, careful not to wrinkle her dress. At 65, Michael Bennett was still tall and broad-shouldered, though his once dark hair had turned completely silver.
A widower for the past decade, he'd raised Laura with a gentle steadiness that had shaped her own approach to life. "Is everyone here?" Laura asked, tucking her arm through his. Michael nodded. "About 60 people, just like you planned. The walkers arrived about 15 minutes ago." Laura's heart quickened. "All of them?" "All 4, Michael confirmed. Diane was fussing with the flower arrangements until the wedding planner politely redirected her. Laura smiled despite her nerves. The past few weeks had been complicated, as family secrets had slowly unraveled. After her shopping trip with Diane, after Ethan's conversation with Ryan, they'd made a decision not to confront or accuse, but to move forward with clear eyes and open hearts. "How's Ethan?" she asked. "Calm," Michael replied, surprising her. "I expected nerves, but he seems centered, like a man who knows exactly where he's supposed to be." The string quartet began playing downstairs, signaling that it was time. Sarah handed Laura her bouquet, garden roses and wildflowers, tied with a simple ribbon, and headed downstairs to join the other bridesmaids.
As Laura descended the staircase with her father, she caught a glimpse of the gathered guests through the French doors leading to the backyard. There, standing beneath the arbor, was Ethan, handsome in his navy suit, his eyes searching until they found her through the glass. Even from a distance, she could see his face transform with love and wonder. Outside, the guests rose as the quartet transitioned to the processional. Laura paused at the threshold of the doorway, taking in the scene before her. Not the grand hotel ballroom of Ryan's wedding, but something far more meaningful. Friends from work, college roommates, family members who had traveled from across the country. In the front row, she spotted Diane and Mark Walker, sitting stiffly beside each other, and Ryan, alone but smiling genuinely at his brother. "Ready?" her father whispered. Laura squeezed his arm, more than ever. Their walk down the aisle felt both eternal and instantaneous. With each step, Laura's focus narrowed until all she could see was Ethan, his eyes never leaving hers, his smile growing as she approached. When they reached the arbor, Michael kissed his daughter's cheek and placed her hand in Ethan's. "Take care of each other," he said simply, before taking his seat. "You're breathtaking," Ethan whispered as they turned to face the officiant, his fingers lacing with hers. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not of perfection but of partnership, of standing together through whatever life might bring. When they exchanged rings, Laura noticed Ethan's hands were steady, his voice clear and certain. "By the power vested in me," the officiant concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Ethan cupped Laura's face with gentle hands, kissing her as their guests erupted in applause. As they turned to face their friends and family, Laura caught sight of Diane Walker dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, Mark's arm around her shoulders in a rare public display of affection. The reception flowed with the natural ease they had hoped for. Long tables set up beneath string lights in Maggie's garden, wine flowing freely, conversations and laughter blending with the music of the quartet. As twilight descended, the paper lanterns in the oak tree illuminated, creating a canopy of soft light above the dance floor. After their first dance, Ethan led Laura toward a quiet corner of the garden, away from the celebration for a moment of privacy. "Happy?" he asked, his hands resting lightly on her waist. "Completely," she replied, linking her arms around his. "Though there is one thing I've been wondering." "What's that?" Laura glanced toward the head table, where an envelope with their names written in Diane's elegant script had been propped against a centerpiece. "What do you think is in your mother's card? She seemed very intent on making sure we didn't open it until after the ceremony." Ethan's expression turned thoughtful. "I don't know. Probably a check for $2,000. "Would that bother you?" Laura asked carefully. Ethan considered this, his eyes scanning the gathering, his parents now mingling with Laura's extended family, Ryan deep in conversation with Sarah, their friends from disparate parts of their lives finding common ground over shared plates and wine glasses. "No," he said finally, "not anymore. Whatever is in that envelope doesn't define us. This does." He gestured to the celebration around them.
The life we choose to build together, that's what matters. Laura studied her husband's face, seeing in it the quiet strength that had first drawn him to him, now tempered with a new confidence. "When did you get so wise, Ethan Walker?" He laughed, pulling her closer. "Probably around the time I realized I was marrying the smartest woman I know." Their moment of solitude was interrupted by the arrival of Ryan, slightly flushed from dancing. "Sorry to intrude on the newlyweds," he said, his smile genuine if a little sad around the edges. "But Mom and Dad are asking for you both. I think Dad wants to make a toast." Ethan exchanged a look with Laura, who nodded encouragingly. "Lead the way," he said to his brother. They found Mark and Diane Walker standing near the bar, both looking uncharacteristically nervous. Diane's hand clutched her husband's arm, her knuckles white with tension. "There they are," Mark said as they approached, his voice overly hearty. "The happy couple." "Beautiful ceremony," Diane added, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Everything is just lovely." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. Laura felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said finally, his voice even. "It means a lot to us." Mark cleared his throat. "Son, we wanted to say something." He glanced at his wife, who nodded slightly. "Your mother and I owe you an apology." Ethan's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Dad, this isn't the time." "Please," Diane interrupted, her voice softer than Laura had ever heard it. "Let him say this." Mark took a deep breath. "We haven't been fair to you, Ethan. Not about the wedding, not about the trust from your grandfather, not about a lot of things, if I'm being honest." "Why?" Ethan asked, the single word carrying the weight of a lifetime of questions. Diane and Mark exchanged a glance laden with history. "Because you've always been the strong one," Diane said, her voice barely audible above the music and laughter surrounding them. "You've always been so capable, so self-sufficient. Ryan needed more from us, or we thought he did." "So you gave him everything and me nothing?" Ethan's voice remained calm, but Laura could feel the tension radiating from him. "We gave him things," Mark corrected gently. "Material things. But you built something real without our help, without anyone's help." He gestured toward Laura, toward the celebration around them. "Look at what you've created here. Look at the life you've made." Diane reached into her clutch and withdrew the envelope from the head table. "We want to make amends, if you'll let us."
Ethan stared at the envelope for a long moment before accepting it. "Thank you," he said simply. "There's something else," Mark added, his expression grave. "About your grandfather's trust fund." "I know," Ethan interrupted, surprising his parents. "Ryan told me everything." Diane's eyes widened. "He did?" "Last month, and he gave me half of it back." "That's why you were able to afford all this," Mark realized, looking around at the tasteful celebration. Ethan nodded, "But not in the way you might think. We didn't upgrade to something flashier. We just stopped compromising on the wedding we actually wanted." He looked at Laura, his eyes softening. "This was never about competing with Ryan's wedding or proving anything to anyone. It was about creating a day that felt true to us." Mark's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. "You're a better man than I am, son. Always have been." Before Ethan could respond, the wedding planner appeared at Laura's elbow. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's time for the cake cutting." "We'll talk more later," Ethan promised his parents, tucking the unopened envelope into his jacket pocket. As they moved toward the cake table, Laura leaned close to her husband. "Are you okay?" Ethan's smile was genuine. "Never better. Whatever's in that envelope, whatever conversations are still to come with my parents, they can wait. Today is about us." The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur of joyful moments. Cake cutting, bouquet tossing, dancing with friends until their feet ached. As the night drew to a close, guests formed a tunnel of sparklers through which Ethan and Laura ran, laughing, toward the vintage Mustang convertible that would take them to their hotel. Before climbing into the car,
Ethan pulled Laura into one last embrace, the sparklers casting golden light across their faces. "Thank you," he whispered against her ear. "For what?" she asked him, looking up. "For showing me what real love looks like. For helping me understand my worth isn't measured by anyone else's standards." Laura stood on tiptoe to kiss him, oblivious to the cheers and well-wishes surrounding them. As they broke apart, she said, "That's the thing about worth, Ethan Walker. It was always there. You just needed to believe it yourself." As they drove away, sparklers fading behind them, Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew the envelope from his parents. With Laura's encouraging nod, he opened it. Inside was a check, not for $2,000 but for $50,000. Attached was a note in his father's handwriting. "This doesn't begin to make up for the past, but perhaps it can help build your future. We are prouder of you than we've ever had the courage to say." Ethan handed the note to Laura, who read it in the glow of passing streetlights. "What will you do with it?" she asked softly. Ethan considered this, as the warm summer air rushed past them, carrying the scent of new possibilities. "Put it toward a house, maybe. Start a college fund for our kids someday." He glanced at her. "What do you think?"
Laura laced her fingers with his. "I think that sounds perfect." As they drove through the quiet streets of Lexington toward Boston and whatever future awaited them, Ethan felt something settle within him. Not the bitter victory of proving his parents wrong, but the quiet triumph of standing firmly in his own truth. He had learned that real value wasn't found in grand gestures or parental approval, but in the courage to build a life of integrity, even when others couldn't see its worth. And in that moment, with Laura beside him and the open road ahead, Ethan Walker knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not the golden child or the afterthought, but simply himself, finally enough. Thank you for joining us for Ethan and Laura's journey. If their story of finding worth beyond other people's expectations resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to